I know we have a lot of comic collectors, but so does anybody have any magazines, in your collection? Is the question that I'm asking.
I think I actually have a couple of magazines. I've got some, what are they? Some Mad magazines.
Mad magazines.
Yeah. Who doesn't love Spy versus Spy?
Yeah. So I think we're getting joined by James, so we will let him.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, man.
All right.
Drum roll, please.
Guys, how's it going?
Hey.
Doing excellent.
Hey,
How are you guys doing?
Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Doing great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to hear everything that you've got to talk about with magazines.
Me
It's
too.
really
Let's
exciting.
dig in. I know this is kind of new. You guys have just started doing these Instagram lives, so let's rock and roll.
Yeah, let's do it.
We're trying to figure out where I need to stand
Same
in the
here.
frame and everything.
Yeah, no,
How
rock
do we look
solid.
and sound? Okay,
Great.
good.
Fantastic. Well, you want to just jump right into it?
Yeah, we'll kind of just let you take it away. Well, just real quick, just we're talking about magazines, like we said at the top for anyone joining. So James, just
So
take it
my
away.
name's
Let us know
James
why you're here
I
today.
run a lot of social media and YouTube accounts under the same username, CGC Sports Illustrated. Been collecting magazines. Been a big Sports Illustrated fan my whole life since I was a kid and had a subscription to the magazine, and held on to them. And I was, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes here. But I kind of had this inherent knowledge that for them to be collectible, that big ugly mailing label that came on them when you got them in the mailbox in your subscription wasn't ideal. And so when I grew up outside of Chicago, and I was a huge Michael Jordan fan, still am. And so whenever Jordan was on a Sports Illustrated cover or another athlete that I was a big fan of, I would always, go with my mom to the grocery store and grab a couple of issues off the newsstand and kind of box those away. And I held on to those for years. And, you grow up and that sort of stuff. You get married and a mortgage and, wife and a kid and that sort of stuff, and kind of fell out of collecting. But I had all these boxes still in my basement. I was getting ready to move. This is probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I was going through all these boxes in my basement. I found all these old vintage Sports Illustrateds that were newsstand that I purchased when I was a kid. I was like, okay, let's go check them out. And that's when I really discovered that CGC, the comic book company, was grading sports magazines. And that was it for me. Ever since then, I kind of jumped in with both feet and have just absolutely loved it. So that's how I really got started. Let me find a good example here. We'll do some show and tell. Let's start with this one, so you can get an idea of what these look like. So this is Victor Wembanyama. I mean, he's the talk of the sports card in the sports world right now. He was drafted #1 by the San Antonio Spurs overall. You can see that beautiful 9.8 there. This issue came out in March 2023. This is his first Sports Illustrated cover. So, tons of people in this hobby went out a couple months ago and this was on the newsstand, purchased this, got it graded, and a great example of what one of these looks like.
That's so interesting. I'm a very big modern NBA fan personally. So when I saw this, I was so excited to see it. That is fascinating.
Graded magazines is really, I've always said it's like the perfect combination of sports cards and comic books, because the physical item is much more like a comic book, the sports card. But obviously, it's all driven by the athletes that are on the cover and our affinity for those athletes. But also, there's a lot of affinity and nostalgia around the Sports Illustrated publication itself. Because if you think about that, I grew up in the late 70s and early 80s. Sports Illustrated was really it's all we had to connect to sports. This was before ESPN and before everybody had cable, and certainly way before the internet and all that sort of stuff. We'd get a little bit of information about our local sports teams in the newspaper, but if you wanted any more than that, you didn't have any other option than Sports Illustrated. So we really kind of waited, by the mailbox, waiting for that Sports Illustrated to show up in that mailbox, because it was huge, because that's the only way we got information. So there's tons of affinity for the athletes, obviously, and we love our big superstars and that sort of stuff, but there's an incredible amount of nostalgia and affinity for the actual Sports Illustrated publication itself. And I think one thing that really You know, Sports Illustrated was amazing and great and a highly respected sports magazine. But what really, you know, another aspect that does it for me is the visual aspect. They had award-winning photography every single year, and these great, amazing photos on the cover throughout the years. And so they're just very aesthetically pleasing, and similar to comic books, they display so well. And if you think about sports cards, that's kind of one of the knocks I always have on sports cards. Is they're tiny. They're tiny. And so, yeah, you can set them up and display them, but you kind of really got to get close to them to really see them and inspect them. Man, this is something you can hang on the wall. You can have a shelf or a bookshelf or something like that and display these, and they just look fantastic.
They sure do.
Yeah, and how long has CGC been grading?
It's been a while. I think it was around 2009 they came out and announced that they were going to create a magazine-sized slab for comic magazines. My guess is they was probably driven by comic-sized magazines, and they said, yeah, we'll grade some, you know, some other magazines as well. But nobody knew, because there's not much crossover, or certainly wasn't as much crossover back then between sports card collecting and comic book collecting. And so those people that were really into sports cards didn't know who CGC was, because they're a comic book company, didn't have any knowledge that they would grade these. So I've gone back and I've looked at some data, and they hardly graded any for probably 7, 8, 9 years or so. So it was kind of around 2017, 2018, 2019 when people finally got this awareness that CGC was grading Sports Illustrated, and that's when it kind of took off. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and collectibles of all sorts just kind of went through the roof, and everybody was stuck at home, and we were bored and digging into collectibles, and that really it really took off since then. And you know, tens and tens of thousands a year are getting graded now.
Yeah. And I think like when I first heard about, you know, graded magazines was probably a couple years ago now with Grant from Grant's Comics, and he's one of the first people that told me about it. And he also had like graded, you know, wrestling magazines, which definitely like up my alley. So yeah, for it being kind of finally seeing it, you know, love, you know, with any of the graded magazines that I'm seeing. You know, so do you have like any other, like, what are some other ones that you have that aren't like sports?
Yeah, let's talk about that. And I know Grant from Grant's Comics too, and Grant's a good guy. And he and I have talked a lot, and he and I have bought and traded some magazines with each other. So I don't know if you guys remember this one, but Slam Magazine is a basketball exclusive magazine that really got big in the 2000s, but came out in the late 90s. And so these are fairly popular too. This is Michael Jordan's first Slam Magazine cover. It's from July of '95. And this is graded 9.8.
Okay.
And what I love about this, so there's other publications that'll be graded, but one thing I love about this hobby is how rare these are. People didn't collect magazines. I mean, comic book collecting, even before they were being graded, I think comic grading kind of started in the early 90s. But even before that, people collected comic books way back in the 60s, and they took care of them, and they put them in bags and boards and stored them properly. Nobody ever did that with a magazine, not really for the most part. So the survivability of these is so low, especially in a high grade, that the rarity goes through the roof. This is the only 9.8 in the entire world. This is a Slam magazine. It's Michael Jordan's first cover. It's graded at 9.8. It's a Pop 1, none graded higher. That rarity is another thing that really draws me to this hobby, because oh my gosh, modern comics, the productions are through the roof. There's a million 9.8s. You know, the modern sports cards. I mean, how many more Luka Doncic PSA 10 rookie cards can we see? They just crank them out like crazy. And there's all this talk that we're in another, you know, junk wax era with sports cards. All of that's really disheartening to me. So this is something that really drew me to Sports Illustrated is how rare these are. And for a collectible that is so rare, how many of them are still very affordable. To sit here and say, well, I own one of these and there's only, you know, 10 or 15 of these in existence today, and I'm able to have one of them, that's special, and really is a big part of what's bringing a lot of people into the hobby. But yeah, Slam Magazine is definitely one that a lot of people get graded. I'm gonna go off camera here for a second, because I'm gonna grab one, because you mentioned wrestling magazine. So hold on.
Yeah, let you do that. I know, Kyle, you're, I guess I'll say big sports.
I'm glad I remembered exactly where this one was. So, signature series. This is Lex Luger. This is his first his first Pro Wrestling Illustrated cover. It's from 1988, and I got it graded at 9.6. I was at a comic book show last year outside of Detroit, and Lex was signing autographs, and there was a CGC facilitator there, Rich Henn, who's a guy I know and have worked with a little bit in the past, and Rich kind of clued me off that Rex was going to be there, and I was like, oh, I've got to go there because I've got some wrestling magazines, and I've got to get a signature series with Lex. So, yeah, no, I'm a big fan of graded wrestling magazines as well, especially the older ones from the 70s and 80s. Like I've got Hulk Hogan's first WWF magazine cover appearance. I've got Randy Savage's first WWF magazine cover appearance. I've got The Rock's first one. I mean, Sports Illustrated is my focus, but these are certainly a ton of fun and look great and love them.
Yeah, is definitely like speaking to me. I feel like my first kind of memories with wrestling were that kind of era, like definitely with like, you know, Young Warrior and that, like when they kind of started popping. So it's interesting to see the cross, see that be graded as well, you know, but I think you also had, I know you're probably going to pull it out, but I was just excited to see it again. The magazine you showed, specific signature on it. I don't
so here's another, so the comic book guys will love this. And I always get questions on this. So this is Sports Illustrated from 1998 when Mark McGwire ended up beating, Roger Maris's home run record, and he hit 70 home runs that year. And so I had an opportunity to get a signature series on this. But if you look closely, if I can get my light angle right, that is not Mark McGwire's signature. That is Todd McFarlane's signature. And for those that aren't from comic books, Todd is a famous comic book creator and illustrator and that sort of stuff. Now, what the heck does Todd McFarlane have to do with this? Todd McFarlane in 1999 infamously paid $3 million for Mark McGwire's 70th home run baseball. It was an outrageous amount of money at the time. It still is today. We're 25 years later, and it's still the most money ever paid for a baseball memorabilia piece. And so when McFarlane was doing the in-house signing at CGC, what was that, the end of last year, everybody was sending in their ASM 300 and their Spawn books and all that sort of stuff to get them signed and whatever. I just like cool, goofy, weird stuff. And so I had this copy, and I knew that Todd had paid for this home run ball that was being talked about on this issue. And so I sent it in to the signing to see if he would sign it. And I wasn't sure that he was going to sign it because Todd's a little particular and he only signs stuff that he works on and that sort of stuff. But he ended up signing it. And so again, I love weird pop one-of-one stuff. This is the only Todd McFarlane signature series Sports Illustrated in existence. So that, for me, that kind of goofy, weird stuff is fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I love those kind of specific things. I feel like that's the whole reason like collecting exists for me. Just those kind of crossovers. Like it all feels like one kind of pot for me. Like, wrestling, comics, concert posters, all those
connected.
Things. Yeah.
We're all interested in the same stuff. It's all connected by art or sports or printed
media.
It's
really for the most part, most of the time comes from our childhood. It's what we grew up on. We're going to collect concert posters from the bands we grew up on, and we're going to collect Sports Illustrateds and sports cards from the athletes we knew as a kid and the comic books we knew as a kid and that sort of stuff. So it all comes. You're right. That's all the stuff we did when we were kids: music and wrestling and sports. Yeah, that was my teenage years. Summed up right there pretty quickly.
Yeah. So for the people in the chat, who might have some of their nostalgia from their teenage years, they're laying in an attic. How got something that's worth?
Yeah, so a couple of things here. So similar to comic books with newsstand and direct, there's a difference between subscription issues and newsstand issues. And CGC will label subscription issues as subscription edition. And they will list them separately in the CGC census. So while there's a similarity there between comic books, newsstand and direct, and subscription versus newsstand, the collectability gap is much wider in Sports Illustrated. So for the most part, subscription issues from Sports Illustrated are not as collectible, and that just comes down to supply and demand. Sports Illustrated has said they produced around 3 million copies of Sports Illustrated every single week that were subscription issues. So whenever you've got, I mean, those are junk wax era numbers. Those are Beanie Baby type numbers. They're just through the roof and huge. So there's tons and tons of Sports Illustrated subscription issues out there. Not saying they're not collectible. They're just not nearly as collectible. But Sports Illustrated also came out and said that they only produce 50 to 100,000 newsstand issues every week. And the survivability of those newsstand issues has seemed to be a lot less than the survivability of subscription issues. So the first thing that anybody that comes into this hobby has to know, and I'm going to show another one here, is the difference between newsstand issues and subscription issues. And it really comes down to pricing. From what I've seen in the market, so let's say Michael Jordan's first Sports Illustrated cover from 1983 in newsstand, graded at 8.5, will sell from anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000. The same issue, the same grade in subscription might sell for about $500. So a huge, massive price difference. So I would expect about 5%, and that's a rough number, but about 5% for an even, comparison of an issue with the same grade of newsstand versus subscription. The subscription issue is going to be about 5% of the value of newsstand. So that's something that if, you've got all these issues in your basement or whatever, keep that in mind. And then, kind of finding the value, it's tough. I mean, obviously you can look at comps on eBay for recent sales. A lot of these, especially a lot of high-end ultra premium pieces, sell on Heritage auction. And the nice thing about Heritage is they go back and archive their previous sales forever. But beyond that, the best thing people can do is reach out to me. There's a couple of us that are really big in content creation in this hobby. I'm certainly one of them. I'm fortunate that I can still reply to every single one of my DMs. So if you're interested in this, find me on social media, CGC Sports Illustrated, and shoot me a DM, and I'll be happy to kind of talk to you and say, hey, let you know what's collectible and what's not collectible and that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we have a question in the chat. Someone's asking, can I pull the sticker off a non-newsstand?
You can, but CGC is going to know. So what the interesting thing is it's virtually impossible to remove a mailing label. One of two things is going to happen. You're either going to leave glue residue behind, or you're going to take the ink off the cover. So label removal, and that's what everybody thinks. Oh, I'm going to game the system here. I'm just going to take this subscription issue and remove the label. It's caught by CGC every single time, for the most part, and they'll label it as a subscription edition. They just are, like I said, you're either going to leave glue residue behind, or you're going to take the ink off if you try and remove it. A good question.
Interesting. Yeah.
Girl. They do know.
Yeah. So what would you say got you started in the hobby? Like, why?
I was never a huge comic guy. I read comics a little bit. I was much more of a sports guy. And I think it was just the fact that I had all of these, like I said at the beginning. I had all of these, Michael Jordan for the most part. Most of them were Jordan, but there were some other athletes in there. But I had all these Michael Jordan Sports Illustrated covers that were purchased off the newsstand from the 80s and 90s. And I just kind of hung on to them. And so discovering them again, whenever that was, 2017, 2018 or something like that, and realizing they can be graded is what really did it. And I think CGC grading these magazines, and you can look through history. Whenever a respected third party says, okay, we're going to come in and grade this collectible and protect it and give it a number, all of a sudden, usually that's when the hobby takes off. That's when sports cards really kind of exploded. It's when comic books really exploded, and you can look at, VHS and video games and Funko Pops, and I saw one company's grading, vintage cassette tapes and that sort of stuff. I think that's really has always been the catalyst. Concert posters. That's really been the catalyst when it comes to grading. As long as that respected third party sits there and says, okay, we're going to grade these and we're going to encapsulate them, because I think it instills a level of uniformity and trust in the marketplace. I can sit here and say that this is, this number grade, it's in this quality, in this condition, and it's been authenticated as, as genuine from this company. man, you remove so much friction from the marketplace when you do that. That's when it really explodes.
Yeah. Yeah. The other question. Yeah.
So I know your focus is mainly in sports magazines, but outside of sports magazines, what publications are you seeing traded most frequently? Like, what are people really looking for?
Let's break this down. So 95% of the hobby is sports magazines, and 95% of that is Sports Illustrated. But if you've been paying attention in this sort of thing, the one non-sports publication that's really popped recently has been Nintendo Power. So Nintendo Power magazine, that was like the little, they were like game guides. It was a magazine produced by Nintendo, and it would come with tips and tricks and game guides and walkthroughs and maps that you could rip out and look at, so that if you were playing Zelda, you knew where the hell to go and that sort of stuff. There was a copy of Nintendo Power, the very first Nintendo Power, that sold for over 6 figures on Heritage just in the last few months. And so, yeah, I think I like to say this a lot. Everything outside of Sports Illustrated, for the most part right now, is pretty speculative. And non-sports magazines are pretty speculative right now as well. Still growing like crazy, but the market's trying to figure everything out. The exception to all of that is that Nintendo Power.
Yeah, I've seen.
Yeah, you know what? So
guide.
I haven't sent it in yet. So yeah, I've seen Graded TV Guide too. So I have Michael Jordan's first TV Guide cover appearance sitting in my stack of ungraded stuff here that I've got to send in and get graded. It hasn't risen to the priority list, but yeah, TV guides have been graded. And you know what? Oddly enough, there's been a community of TV guide collectors for decades. For whatever reason, there was even a Seinfeld episode about it, about some guy, weirdo that was stalking Elaine that collected TV guides, and Frank Costanza collected them too. So there's always been this community of people that collected TV guides, and now they're getting them graded as well, which I think is awesome. I love, these ultra niche communities that kind of exist over something that these people are so passionate about and have so much interest in, that people on the outside sit there and go, what, why would you do that? For me, that's awesome. I love it when somebody from the outside looks at what I'm doing and going, why would you do that? Because it's cool. It's fun.
Yeah, and someone in the chat just said, picked up a TV guide and send it to press.
See?
Soon.
It's everybody's got their own little things that they're into. And, the one downside I will say about grading TV guide is it still comes in the big slab. So you've got this, and they still put it in the magazine slab. So you've got this tiny little TV guide, because it was a tiny publication, in this massive slab with all this dead space. It would be good if they had a form factor that fit that, but hey, I understand.
Yeah, and we had another question in the chat that was, so the numbered slam mags, are they worth grading?
Great question. Let's talk about that. Funny that I happen to have one sitting here. So this Slam did a very cool thing, and they've been doing this for a few years, where they put out their metal edition magazines. And so they release these and they sell them on their website, and there's always some available. And they're numbered. So this is Luka Doncic. This is his second Slam magazine cover from 2021. This is the gold medal edition, numbered up to 94. And they've got different ones, and I think some of them probably get as rare as numbered up to like 40 or 50. They are, like I said before, I'll say the same thing I said before. Everything outside of Sports Illustrated right now is really speculative, because this is a kind of a really niche vertical. It's growing like crazy, still, ultra small compared to sports cards and comic books, but we just haven't seen enough buying and selling in the marketplace really to sit here and say, yeah, these are ultra collectible. I think these are cool. I think numbered, I love numbered sports cards and all that sort of stuff. You're not gonna be able to see it, but it's got the embossed numbering right there. CGC does a good job of labeling. It says gold 3 of 94 on the slab label. I think they're really cool. I think that the challenge that I've seen, and I bought a number of them, like this Luka Doncic one here, the challenge that Slam has is getting this delivered to the collector in better condition. If they're going to start selling a numbered magazine, and they go for about $100, and they can go for more than $100 on the Slam website, that's the retail price. If you're going to be charging that kind of money for something, You've got to be able to deliver this to me in something at 9.8 condition or pretty darn close to 9.8 condition. And so far, Slam hasn't done that. So these are very, very difficult to get in a 9.8. I mean, I think this one showed up when I bought this one. It showed up to my house. It had a plastic, shrink wrap over it, and it was just like in a manila envelope. There was no protection during the shipping process for it at all. So I think I would love it if Slam could clear up their production and their shipping methods so that they get shipped to us in a little bit better condition. I think that's really what's holding these back right now. But these are pretty cool, and I'm a fan of them and have several of them.
It is interesting to see them start numbering.
You know what? And hats off to Slam for recognizing the collectability of magazines and creating a numbered product. Also, something that CGC just announced in the last couple of months. You can now get custom Slam labels. That's brand new. So you can get custom Slam labels. I would love it if they could do the same thing with Sports Illustrated. Maybe they'll get there someday. But yeah, the CGC has a custom label, just like the Marvel custom labels that they do for comic books. So I think that these things, as the hobby continues to grow and we've got people like me in the hobby that are advocating for certain things that collectors want, I think that places like CGC, Slam, Sports Illustrated, hopefully are going to, slowly, it's going to be a slow process, but hopefully we'll start listening and being able to make some changes that appeal to collectors and kind of get what the hobby is interested in.
Yeah. We had 2 questions. I think this sort of other. So are the kind of bigger ESPN mags, are they graded? And I guess the other kind of question with that, who else is grading
That's a great question. So I'll take the second one first. Nobody. CGC is the only one. CBCS says that they grade magazines, but on their website, and you can get all sorts of information there. But I've talked to them, and others in this hobby have talked to them. What they mean when they say that are comic-sized magazines. So they'll grade, Giant X-Men and those other large form factors of comic books. But they have specifically told me and others that have talked to them directly, they will not grade sports magazines right now. So CGC is the only game in town. Form factor size. So CGC, kudos to them. They'll pretty much grade any publication as long as it's 8.5 by 11 and smaller and less than a 1/2 inch thick. And the reason why they do that is because it's got to fit their slabs. By the way, this is Yogi Berra's first Sports Illustrated cover from 1955, graded at a 9.6. This is a Pop 2 with none higher, back to that rarity that I talked about before. Oversized publications are not going to work. So what's that leave out of the equation? Life magazine. You guys remember those on your grandma's, coffee table or whatever? Freaking huge. That's out of the game. The original ESPN, the magazine, those were oversized as well. Now, ESPN changed the size of their magazine, I think, around 2019 or 2020. And so the ultra modern ESPN ones that are 8.5 by 11 or smaller, you can grade those. The other one it leaves out, which it's too bad because I would love to see these be graded, and that's Rolling Stone magazine. There are a ton. That was always, and again, that one shrank down, I think, in 2019 or 2020, but every Rolling Stone produced before that is this giant oversized magazines. And that's another one. Similar to what I talked about, these being so aesthetically pleasing and incredible photography and all of that. Rolling Stone was the same way. Those Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone, those are a freaking work of art, man. Those are just absolutely beautiful pieces, and that's the aesthetic part of this is one of the things I love. Similar with Rolling Stone, but unfortunately they're just too big.
Yeah, the Rolling Stone, and also I guess like Surfer magazine, I feel like they made those a little bit bigger, and a lot of the skateboarding.
Yeah, I've got actually a bunch of Mac World. There was a magazine for Mac owners, and Steve Jobs is on the first cover of Mac World, and it's just a little too big. So that one annoys me as well.
I had another question about another magazine. Do you know if Big Brother magazines are graded by CGC?
I'm not familiar with that publication specifically, but from what I've seen, CGC will grade pretty much anything as long as it's 8.5 by 11 and smaller and less than a 1/2 inch thick.
Yeah, so some of the early run of Big Brother might get a little strange. They would kind of change the format every issue. So they have like, that's the cereal box, and they have another issue that's like the kind of, when you get something down at like, well, FedEx office now, that's the, collated kind of thing. Just all these types of weird things. But then eventually they, since they started getting distributed by Hustler, and so that kind of led them to bigger, numbers, and that led them to just kind of go to like a regular magazine size. So it'd be interesting to see if those type of skateboarding stuff. It's just
hey, you mentioned
what
Hustler, and that brings up Playboy is starting to become very popular as well, especially the vintage Playboys. I mean, the very first copy of Playboy, I think it's 1952 or 1953. Marilyn Monroe is on the cover. High grades of those have regularly sold for 6 figures plus for a while now. So yeah, vintage Playboy is another one that people are getting into and getting graded a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I like that it kind of feels like it fits around a certain ones. I've seen a lot of Sports Illustrated, like you said, Playboy, and even seeing TV Guide. I feel like those are the good kind of staples to build the hobby off of. It'd be good to kind of see more things graded or just see more things in the market. But
no, I think what people have, what people really want for the most part are respectable publications, the publications that we remember. So here's a great one. I collect a number of Time and Newsweek. So this is 1998 after the Yankees won the World Series. This is a variant. That's another thing that's similar to comic books. Sports Illustrated and even Time Magazine would produce variant covers. So if you can see here, that's author Tom Wolfe. That was the cover that was distributed to 95% of the country the week that this issue came out. But in the New York metro area, they produced a special copy that is just about the New York Yankees because they had just won the World Series. We've had to fight a little bit with CGC to get them to recognize this as variants, but you can see that they've labeled it as a variant. So they've broken this out separately in the CGC census. So now we know, which one is the Yankees cover. And if anybody's getting Tom Wolfe graded, I guess we'll know that too. So Time Magazine's a big one. Newsweek is a big one. I see a lot of people using Time and Newsweek to get pop culture figures and even political figures graded. There's some very cool, I've seen a couple of very cool vintage Albert Einstein covers of Time Magazine from the 40s. I have John F. Kennedy's inauguration Time Magazine graded. I've got Ronald Reagan's very first Time Magazine cover appearance from 1966 graded. I've seen Bruce Springsteen, his appearance on Time Magazine in the 70s. So again, that's around the fringes of the hobby, but you're seeing people starting to do that more. Pop culture figures, Elon Musk and his first Time Magazine cover appearance, I've seen that. So kind of politicians and that sort of stuff. There's definitely an interest in those non-sports figures, but still on popular and knowledgeable, well-known publications.
I've definitely seen an uptick just in general with, like you were saying, political people. Like I've seen an uptick in kind of sales with like JFK posters and other kind of political leaders, like, a lot of 70s stuff, 60s with JFK. It was specifically like his birthday where Marilyn Monroe like sang happy birthday to him. I've seen that in auction a couple times. So kind of seeing the cross-reference between those kind of pop culture time stamps of certain things. It's all across.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting.
JFK
really was actually on the cover of Sports Illustrated in 1962. Him and then the First Lady were on a cover of Sports Illustrated, and it is extraordinarily rare to find that in a newsstand. There's only a handful of copies graded. It's very collectible. There have been 5 presidents or future presidents that have been on Sports Illustrated. And so I know a number of people that are collecting that run. JFK, Gerald Ford, Reagan twice, and Bill Clinton. So yeah, very cool. The hobby leads to it's based and its core is around sports and primarily Sports Illustrated, but there's a lot of really interesting offshoots that are being generated out there.
And it's cool to see there's like a very similar thing with here, the key issues, the first appearance. Outside of first appearances of like in specific mag, what kind of like key issue factors should we be looking out for?
So let's talk about that because it is interesting. So it is that mix of sports cards and comic books. The collectability and what's collectible is really driven by sports cards. So the big athletes that drive sports cards, they're going to drive the collectability of the sport, of the graded Sports Illustrated. Also different than comics. When it comes to comic collecting, what's on the inside is also important to the collector. The story, the illustration, you know, a lot of times you'll see on the slab, you know, the origin of, you know, whatever superhero. So far what the market is telling me, that's not the case with sports magazines. When it comes to sports magazines, all anybody cares about for the most part right now that we can see is what the cover is and who's on the cover. So it's the stories and the articles inside. There's a couple of exceptions, but they're very rare. That's really what drives it. First covers for the most part. If you can't get the first cover, and this is true in sports cards. I mean, if I can't afford a, you know, a Mickey Mantle 52 tops, usually the next one in demand is the 53 or the 54 or the 55, and you kind of go up from there in era. See something similar in sports magazines. And then it all depends on the story. So I'm trying to think of a good one off the top of my head here, but you know, Dennis Rodman's first appearance on Sports Illustrated in a Bulls uniform. You know, his first Sports Illustrated cover, he was a member of the San Antonio Spurs. But if you're a big Bulls fan like I am, I'm going to want the first time he shows up in a Bulls uniform. So those sorts of stories and firsts that go along with it, you know, you can sit here and say, okay, multiple Hall of Famers on the same cover add to collectability. So in 1991, the Bulls played the Lakers in the NBA Finals. That was the first year that the Bulls won the championship. The Sports Illustrated cover from that week had both Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan on the cover, and that was the headline, Magic versus Michael. Okay, that's not the first cover appearance by a long shot for either Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan, but man, the story behind it makes that one a key issue because it's Jordan's first championship. It's both Jordan and Magic on the cover together. So I think what you're looking for are those kinds of stories that sit here and say, okay, how does this issue and the photo relate to that moment in time in history and what was going on? And then, you know, who's included on it? You know, this Time magazine is a great example of that. I mean, you know, you've got this amazing photograph of the Yankees on the field celebrating that World Series and Time magazine declaring them the best team ever. So it's those sorts of things and the stories behind the cover and the headline that can make an issue key or not, and goes beyond the collectability of a standard first cover.
Yeah, and just like someone was kind of asking about, like, you know, CDs and, you know, being graded. I know that's like kind of newer on the market, and I personally, because I feel like I do a lot in that kind of field, I would like to see people like have those kind of moments like you're talking about with, you know, magazines, those kind of like historical moments. But they're also kind of hard to trace whenever you're looking back at, like, let's say Beatles, like what was the kind of the first pressing, and being able to kind of really find that because it's so long ago, or either it's just so many pressings have happened. Like when you're looking at that Sports Illustrated, it's just Sports Illustrated. So I think that's where it makes like vinyl and CD a little hard to figure out, because there were so many different companies that were like commissioned to make like one pressing. So to kind of answering that question, it can be a little fuzzy to kind of tell. And I know that there are some grading companies with it. I'd like to, you know, kind of see where they go, but I just in the same way of everything you're talking about, just kind of highlighting these same specific moments and kind of actually grading things that kind of have these.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that's one of the big advantages of sports magazines, and specifically Sports Illustrated, because there's a lot of resources out there where I can sit here and find, okay, where was this photo taken and what was the date it was taken on? So I know so this is a copy of the very first Sports Illustrated that was ever produced in 1954. That's Eddie Matthews on the cover. This was taken at the opening of County Stadium in Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Braves, in 1954. So I can go back and I can sit here and say, okay, this photo was taken on this date. It's of this athlete, and it tells this historical story. The first time they ever played a game in the old County Stadium in Milwaukee. There are a lot of good resources out there to be able to find that information regarding Sports Illustrated cover photos. And I think it's one of the real advantages that this hobby has, because it allows us to tell the stories associated with them even better than some of the other ones that don't have that advantage.
And you mentioned the stories that are connected to these, and I know it becomes like a very big thing with comics, where movies will influence the price of a comic. Have you ever seen like a movie or a TV show or something coming out that influences the price?
It can happen. It's generally more the athlete's performance that will influence the price and collectability. I mean, LeBron earlier this year broke the all-time scoring record, the NBA. There was a little bump there for his Sports Illustrateds and his sports cards. You know, when an athlete goes into the Hall of Fame, they usually get a little bit of a bump when they play well. I mean, Shohei Ohtani, I mean, last night, pitched 6 scoreless innings and hit 2 home runs, and he's leading the league in home runs. I mean, nobody's hotter in baseball right now than Shohei Ohtani, and his collectability is certainly going up in that. Since you mentioned that, give me a second. I'm going off camera again. Sorry. Oh, I got it.
Yeah.
You mentioned something, and it makes me think of something. So this is really interesting. This is a Slam magazine that came out when Space Jam 2 came out. So again, a lot of us have, and Space Jam 2, paled in comparison to the original Space Jam. And I'm not just saying that because I favor Jordan over LeBron. It just wasn't as good of a movie, but still pretty darn cool that Slam would put out a magazine with Bugs Bunny and LeBron wearing the Space Jam uniform. Yeah, absolutely. Rare for something like this to happen, but absolutely. I love this freaking magazine, and I'm not a big LeBron fan. I'm a Jordan guy, but still pretty cool, and still something that I had to have. So, yeah.
Yeah, a question in the chat. What is like your favorite graded item that you own? That's a question from
So
the
that's
chat.
always tough. I am a grade snob. Okay, so there's one, and I'm not going to be able to dig it out because it's buried, but there is a sports. So the 1992 NBA Finals, the Bulls won. Michael Jordan was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. That's an issue that my mom went out and bought for me because she knew I was a huge Bulls fan. And right after the championship and the Bulls won, she bought it. So I have that sentimental attachment to that one. My mom bought for me. I saved it for 20 years. I sent it into CGC and it graded at 9.8. So that's one that just kind of holds a personal sentimentality to me. But the other one of the other ones is yeah, here it is again. That Mark McGuire, because again, I just love goofy stuff, and I love to be able to sit here and say, yeah, I may be an idiot, but I'm the only idiot that got Todd McFarlane to sign the 70th home run Sports Illustrated. So it's those sorts of things this is one of my favorites. Those are what really appeal to me, are the ones that, again, that I have a personal story behind. I love that Lex Luger. I've got another one that at the same signing was Ron Simmons, who was a big WCW wrestler. And so at the same Lex Luger signing, I got a Ron Simmons signature series when he was on the cover of WCW magazine. And I love that because Ron was blown away when I showed up, because he's sitting there signing photographs and he may sign some sports cards and stuff. I'm the only guy that brought a magazine. And so he was totally enthralled. He was like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen this in years. This is awesome. I can't believe what great shape it is. He starts telling me about what was going on the day they did the shoot for that cover, because it was the first time he was on the cover of WCW. He's like, I had tons of copies of these, and I don't think I have any anymore, and this is so great. He talked to me for like 15 minutes because he thought what I had was cool. So it's again, because I was able to have that personal interaction with Ron Simmons, the wrestler, and because he was blown away by what I brought to have him sign. That's one of my favorites. So I think it's those that have that kind of personal story that really only matter to me. Those are going to be the ones that that I cherish the most, and those are my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, I think
definitely. Yeah, you said, oh gosh, you said you wanted to be the only idiot, and I think that's kind of what it's all about. Is just being. I'm going to be the only idiot who has this.
That is. That's what I love, and that's why I've never. You see this in a lot of collectibles where people get really snobby and sit here and say, you shouldn't collect that, or you're an idiot for collect. I've never been that way. I love the guy that sits out there and says, you know what, I'm going to collect TV guides. That's awesome. Do it. And you know what? There's a lot of people go out there that collect. I don't want people to think when I said that subscription issues aren't as collectible. There are a lot of people that can't afford to buy graded newsstand magazines, and so they buy the subscription issue. That's awesome. You know, that's not what I'm into, but if that's what you're into, man, I fully support it 100%. I love it when somebody finds something that they're passionate about and they go all in for it, however stupid it may be. And like I said, in fact, the more people that think it's stupid, that means I'm absolutely on the right track.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost how I solely collect. I feel like I collect a lot of things, like this movie adaptation comic. So I get like Universal Soldier, the comic, you know, and it's like when I have GoCollect at my fingertips and I can tell they're not really like worth anything, but it just feels like such a specific snapshot. And even just to see like the ads of that specific time, just always, you know,
so
kind of
a friend of mine works in Hollywood. He's a photographer and works in Hollywood, shoots on movies and TV shows and that sort of stuff. He gets these like Hollywood specific industry trade magazines graded that nobody's ever heard of. And unless you're a photographer and you're working in cameras and lenses in a professional manner, you wouldn't know that this magazine exists. But because, you know, it's got Ewan McGregor on the cover, and he's a big Hollywood star, and because he happened to work on that Ewan McGregor film that the magazine's talking about, he got that graded. That's my favorite stuff. That means so much to that individual person, and that's why they want to collect it and grade it. And if anybody else is interested, come along for the ride, and if not, forget it. Who cares?
Yeah. I even think about, like, as a kid, I would, you know, cut out like the NASCAR cards out of the cereal box and put it in there like it was, you know, every other trading card. And as a little kid, I didn't know, but now I'm like, I wish I had those, you know, like, you know, just, you know,
I used
to collect
everything. I used to collect the Wheaties boxes when an athlete was on them. I've still got a bunch of them. I've got a bunch of Wheaties boxes with Michael Jordan on the cover. Still has the cereal inside. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But yeah, that goofy stuff is always, always what people seem to be most passionate about, and that's the most fun.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, this was a great chat, you know. So I know people can see your hand right here. Where can people find you, you know, on other?
Yeah, so I've got a YouTube channel. So the good news, my username is the same on every platform. So it's CGC Sports Illustrated. I've got a YouTube channel. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. There's a Facebook group. I'm on TikTok, Reddit, every single social media platform. Just look for my username, CGC Sports Illustrated. You can check out my content, send me questions, shoot me DMs. I really encourage you to do that. I'm happy to I'm happy to take the time to walk somebody through the process that's new to this hobby.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really, thank you so much.
Good. I'm glad you guys invited me. I had a ton of fun, and I'd be happy to come back again if you want to do it sometime in the future too. So really appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, we'll definitely, we'll definitely have you back. Yeah. And obviously, everyone listening, you know, follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You know, check out our blogs. Yeah. We have some, you know, magazine content up there. This was a lot of fun.
All right.
And
awesome.
Yeah, we'll
see you guys soon.